Virginia, 1865. The war was ending, but my world was just beginning to burn. My name is Celeste, and I was born a slave on Ashford Manor. Now I carry the child of the man who once owned me. The world calls it shame. I call it survival. Each morning I stand on this porch watching the sun bleed through the mist, praying the light will hide my secret a little longer. Inside, Colonel William Ashford drowns his sorrow in whiskey and memory. Outside, the air smells like change, sweet, dangerous, and close enough to touch. He calls me cousin when others listen, wife when they don't. Both words taste like freedom and fear, but the road outside is filling with riders, men who still believe a woman like me should bow or die. And this time they're not coming for him. They're coming for me, and the child that carries both our blood. If you believe love can break chains, subscribe, and tell me, would you hide or fight? When I first came to Ashford Manor, I was 14, thin as a fence rail, carrying a burlap sack and a name no one bothered to say aloud. The war had not yet begun, but the air already smelled of fear and pride. Everything here was painted white. The columns, the fences, even the smiles. The mistress, Mrs. Margaret Ashford, took my measure with eyes that were kind but tired. She said I was to serve in the house, not the fields. "Keep your head down, girl," she told me. "Do as you're told and you'll live a quiet life." But there was nothing quiet about this house, the floors whispered. The portraits stared. Every corner carried the weight of someone else's sorrow. The enslaved walked carefully, always listening for the sound of boots. The overseers, the masters, the boys who practiced cruelty like sport. At night I slept beneath the kitchen stairs, counting the cracks in the wall and wondering which one would open first, the one in the plaster, or the one in my heart. Then came Mrs. Margaret's secret. She pressed an old Bible into my hands and whispered, "Learn these letters when no one's watching." Those nights changed me. Every word I learned felt like a stolen key. Outside, the world was shifting. Whispers of freedom drifted through the quarters like smoke. Some believed, some didn't. But I kept listening because the wind that carried their whispers also carried my name. The Ashford sons went off to war with laughter and promises. They returned in wooden boxes draped with gray flags. Mrs. Margaret grew thin and sick, and I sat by her bed reading the very words she had taught me. When she died, she left me a folded note that said only, "Keep reading." After her passing, the master, Colonel William Ashford, became a ghost in his own home. He spoke less, drank more. Sometimes he forgot I was in the room. Sometimes he remembered too clearly. I learned the rhythm of his footsteps, the tilt of his voice, the silence between his words. That silence would one day pull us together and destroy us both. 57 to 1865. One house, one girl who learned to read her own chains. If you had been Celeste, young, alone, and secretly learning what could get you killed, would you have kept reading? By the spring of 1865, Ashford Manor had begun to rot from the inside out. The paint peeled. The roof leaked. The mirrors were covered to hide the faces of the dead. And William Ashford, once the proud master of this land, sat alone among his ledgers, whispering to ghosts. He was not cruel, not in the way other men were. His anger burned quiet, not loud. But silence can wound deeper than any whip. Each day, I brought his meals to the study that had once smelled of tobacco and victory. Now it smelled of whiskey and loss. He barely looked at me at first, except to ask where the papers were, or whether the creditors had sent more threats. But slowly something changed. He began to speak. Not as a master, but as a man cracking open beneath the weight of what he'd built. "Everything my father made is gone," he said one night, staring into the fire. "The world's ending, Celeste, and I can't stop it. I should have stayed silent." But something in his voice, the same emptiness that echoed inside me, made me answer. "It's ending for all of us, sir," I said. "But maybe what's dying needs to." He looked up sharply. For a moment I thought I'd gone too far. But instead of anger, I saw something else in his eyes. Recognition. The kind that passes between two people who have both lost everything. After that night, he began asking me questions. How many servants remained? Which fields still grew? How much grain was left? He listened, truly listened, to every word I said. We started keeping books together. He'd read the numbers. I'd translate the meaning behind them. Late hours by lamplight turned into quiet conversation. He'd ask about my childhood, my dreams, my thoughts on things no one had ever cared to ask me before. One night, the candle burned low and our hands brushed over the same page. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. He whispered, "You should have been born free." I whispered back, "So should you." We both knew what couldn't be said. That night, he didn't touch me. He just sat across from me, his eyes tired, his voice low. "If the world sees me speaking to you like this," he murmured, "they'll call me mad." "Then let them," I said. "They already do." Outside, the rain beat against the windows like drums from another world, the sound of something ending, or something beginning. Virginia, 1865. One dying plantation. Two souls crossing lines that could get them killed. Would you have stayed in that room? Or walked away before love became a sentence? The nights grew longer after that first rain. I told myself the study meetings were for work, numbers, ledgers, and debts. But the ledgers closed earlier each evening, and the talking went on long after the candles burned low. He would sit by the fire, sleeves rolled to his elbows, gray showing at his temples, the smell of whiskey mixing with the faint scent of lavender from Mrs. Margaret's old letters. He'd ask me about the world outside the gates, how the freed people were living, what they dreamed of. I'd ask him what it felt like to lose sons to a war that was already lost. His answers broke something open in me. "My boys believed they were fighting for honor," he said one night. "But all they found was death." "And for what?" "For someone else's power," I said quietly. He looked at me then, not as a servant, but as the only person left who still spoke truth to him. Days passed. The house began to breathe differently. The servants watched us with new eyes. Even the air in the hallway seemed to hum with rumor. One night, a storm rolled in from the river. Lightning turned the windows white. William was in his chair, a glass untouched beside him, staring into the dark. "They'll take this land from me," he said softly. "Everything my father built. They can't take what's already dying," I replied. He laughed once, tired, hollow. Then his voice broke. "What am I supposed to save now?" "Yourself," I said. "If you still can." He looked up. The storm flashed behind him, outlining the sorrow on his face. He reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. His fingers trembled, not from drink but from fear of his own heart. When his lips touched mine, it wasn't command. It was surrender. The thunder outside covered the sound of everything changing. Afterward, I sat by the dying fire, my heart loud in the quiet. I thought of every woman who'd been forced before, hurt before, silenced before, and knew this was different. Still dangerous, but chosen. By morning, the house was the same. Breakfast served, curtains drawn, the master at his desk. But when his hand brushed mine, the world tilted again. And somewhere beyond the walls, I swear the wind carried a warning. Nothing stays secret in Virginia. 65. One night of mercy. 1,000 nights of fear to follow. If you were Celeste, would you have believed love could protect you, or feared it first? The first signs came quiet. Sickness at dawn, trembling hands, a faint flutter in my belly that no prayer could hide. I'd seen it before in the quarters. The way a woman's eyes turned frightened when she knew a child was coming into a world that didn't want it. For 3 days, I said nothing. I washed, cooked, smiled, and prayed the truth would vanish. But the truth kept growing. When I finally told him, it was raining again. He was in the library, surrounded by ledgers and ghosts. "William," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I'm with child," he froze. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd send me away. But then he crossed the room and held my face in his trembling hands. "My God," he whispered. "Our child? Our child." The words felt like fire and forgiveness all at once. We both knew what it meant. There was no hiding what the world would see when this baby came. Proof of our love, and proof of our sin. I waited for him to fall apart, but instead he straightened, like a man waking from a long sleep. "Then we changed the story," he said. "If Virginia won't allow truth, we'll make a new truth." The next days blurred into planning. He would buy papers, manumission papers, real ones, and file them quietly in Richmond. I would become Celestine Ashford, his cousin from New Orleans, a widow of mixed French blood who came to help him manage the estate. We would leave for Louisiana, find a priest who asked no questions, and marry under candlelight. When we returned, the lie would be law. I wanted to believe it. I needed to. But every night, as the baby grew beneath my ribs, I felt the danger breathing closer. One evening he came to my door with a small gold band and said softly, "You'll wear this when we return. You'll be my wife in name and truth." I wanted to cry. Instead, I kissed the hand that had once owned me, now shaking as it freed me. But even freedom had chains. I burned my old clothes, my papers, my name. The girl called Celeste vanished into ash. When the fire died, I was someone else. I was Madame Celestine Ashford, mistress of the house. And the law, the same law that once bound me, would now protect me. At least that's what we told ourselves. Virginia, 1865. A secret child. A false name. A plan to rewrite the world. If your freedom depended on a lie, would you tell it? Or die with the truth? The night we left the plantation, the moon hid behind clouds like it knew our secret. The horses were restless, their hooves sinking into wet earth. William rode ahead, his lantern swinging low. We said nothing. Even words felt dangerous. By the time we reached the cypress grove, the air was thick with mist and frog song. An old man stood waiting, wrapped in a black coat, the firelight flickering in his eyes. They called him Moses, a preacher who'd buried more souls than he'd wed, a man who had once been enslaved and still spoke like the river, slow, deep and certain. He looked at me, then at William, and said simply, "Do you understand what you're doing?" William nodded. "I do." Moses smiled, weary but kind. "Then you understand this union ain't for this world. It's for the next." He lifted a piece of cloth torn from an old prayer shawl and bound our hands together. "Do you, William, take this woman not as your property, but as your equal?" "I do." "And do you, Celeste, take this man not as your master, but as your choice?" "I do." His voice trembled when he said the next words. "Then may God see you as one flesh, even if the law never will." William slid a gold ring onto my finger. Simple, heavy, warm. For a moment, the swamp disappeared. I wasn't a slave. I wasn't a secret. I was a woman, a wife standing beside a man who finally saw me. We sealed it with a kiss that burned like confession. The torches hissed in the damp air, and the frogs fell silent as if creation itself was holding its breath. When it was over, Moses placed his hand on my stomach and whispered, "May this child walk between worlds and break the curse of both." We rode back in silence, the night closing around us like a secret tomb. By dawn, William burned my old rags, my papers, my name. Celeste was gone. When I looked in the mirror that morning, the woman staring back wore silk instead of linen, gold instead of rope. Her eyes were calm, her back straight, her voice steady. But behind the new face, my heart whispered the truth. You can't bury who you were. She'll always claw her way back through the earth. Virginia, 1865. A swamp wedding. A new name. A love that defied law and God. Would you have taken that vow, knowing it could end at the gallows? When we returned to Ashford Manor, the house looked the same, but nothing inside it was. William introduced me as Madame Celestine Ashford, his cousin from New Orleans, a widow touched by tragedy, a woman of refined manners and French blood. Every word was a lie wrapped in silk. He burned my old clothes himself, ordered new gowns from Richmond. The first time I wore one, I hardly recognized my reflection. The girl who once scrubbed these floors now glided over them. The servants bowed when I entered, some out of respect, most out of fear. Old Sarah, who had taught me to cook, couldn't meet my eyes. Tom, who once laughed beside me under the magnolia trees, now looked at the ground. They whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. She forgot where she came from. And maybe I had, because to survive as mistress I had to. I learned how to walk slower, speak softer, command with my chin high and my heart cold. I learned that authority in a woman, especially one of mixed blood, had to be twice as sharp to be half believed. Every morning, I kept accounts in William's study, managing the plantation with numbers and decisions that cost someone their supper or their sleep. And every night I cried quietly, so no one would hear the sound of the new mistress breaking like the old servant she still was. William tried to comfort me. "You're safe now," he'd say. But safety is its own kind of prison. Neighbors came to call, curious, polite, suspicious. They studied my face like it was a riddle. One woman whispered that I looked foreign. Another said exotic. I smiled, poured tea, and pretended not to notice the way their eyes lingered on the curve of my hands, the warmth of my skin. Every smile felt like a test. Every visit, a knife hidden in lace. But at night, when the doors closed and the world disappeared, he'd take my hands and whisper, "We've beaten them all, Celestine. We made our own truth." And for a few stolen hours, I'd let myself believe him, 'cause in his arms I wasn't a secret. I was a woman who had taken back her life, even if it wasn't hers to keep. Yet freedom built on lies doesn't last. And as the child inside me grew, so did the eyes watching from the shadows. Virginia, 1865. A woman reborn in silk, a secret cracking beneath its own beauty. If power meant losing every friend you ever had, would you still take it? He was born on a cold December morning, when frost clung to the windows like lace and the fields lay silent under gray skies. William paced the hall outside, his boots echoing in rhythm with my cries. For hours I thought I might die, not from the pain, but from the fear of what I might see when the child finally came. Would his skin betray us? Would his face speak the truth we'd buried? When the first cry broke through the silence, I wept before I even saw him. Then the doctor, the same man who delivered William's sons decades earlier, placed the baby in my arms. He was light, pale enough to pass. His eyes blue like William's, his hair dark and straight, his features soft enough to belong anywhere and nowhere. William burst through the door before anyone could stop him. His face broke open with joy. "He's perfect," he whispered. "James William Ashford. My son." The name was a shield, honoring his fallen boy, covering the new one in legitimacy. The doctor bowed. The servants whispered congratulations. The lie grew roots, but that night, as I nursed my son in candlelight, I traced his tiny fingers and felt the truth pulsing through him. He carried both worlds in his veins, the blood they hated and the blood they worshipped. I prayed the world would never notice the difference. In the following weeks, Ashford Manor began to bloom again. Neighbors came bearing gifts, eager to celebrate what they thought was the master's redemption story. A cousin wife, a newborn heir, a family restored. They saw what they wanted to see, a southern miracle rising from the ashes of war. But the servants knew better. Their eyes lingered on me too long. Their voices fell quiet when I entered the room. They saw the way I held the baby close, the way my breath caught every time someone leaned in too near. Old Sarah muttered to another, "Ain't no lie that lives forever." I pretended not to hear her. At night, when the house finally slept, William and I would sit beside the crib, watching the soft rise and fall of our son's chest. "We did it," he'd whisper. "He's free. You're free." I'd smile, but the word free felt fragile, like glass in my hands. Because freedom built on a lie is freedom that trembles, and one honest pair of eyes could shatter it all. Still, when James gripped my finger, with his tiny hand, I believed, for just a moment, that love could rewrite history. Virginia, 1866. One child, two worlds, and a secret written in blood. Would you risk everything to protect a lie if it meant your child could live free? By the time James turned 2, the world had begun to whisper again. He was growing fast, bright, curious, laughing at everything. His hair darkened. His eyes remained the same piercing blue as his father's. But sometimes, in certain light, I saw something else in him. A reflection of me. We'd become careful about who visited. Still, Ashford Manor could not hide forever. That spring, the county gathered for the first grand wedding since the war's end. Everyone who mattered would be there. And if we stayed away, it would only feed the rumors. I dressed slowly that morning, choosing a gown of deep blue silk. Modest, elegant, safe. William kissed my hand before we left. "They'll see you as I do," he said softly. I prayed he was right. The ballroom was a maze of chandeliers and gloved suspicion. Every step I took felt like walking across glass. The women smiled, but their eyes weighed me. Whispered, "She's beautiful, isn't she?" but something foreign in her. Another replied, French blood, they say, or something else entirely. Then came Mrs. Eleanor Fairfax, a woman whose smile could peel paint. She swept toward us in silver lace and poison perfume. My dear Mrs. Ashford, she said, her voice dripping sugar. How lovely to finally meet the mysterious cousin from New Orleans. Her gaze studied my face like a hunter studying a wounded bird. Tell me, dear, how are the Bogards? You must know them. Prominent Creoles, quite famous in the quarter. I had memorized every map of New Orleans, every false family tree. Yes, of course, I said smoothly. They moved east before the fever came. Savannah, I believe. It scattered so many good families. Her smile faltered. Naturally. And your late husband, what was his business again? Shipping, I said. But grief took more than the sea ever did. It was a duel fought with smiles and lies. And I had to win every round. Then James toddled toward us, his tiny shoes tapping the floor, his curls catching the light. Mama, he said, reaching for me. Mrs. Fairfax's eyes narrowed. She bent low, studying his face. For a moment I thought she saw it, the truth buried in his skin. But then William appeared, lifting James with practiced ease. There's my boy, he said cheerfully. Already charming the ladies, Mrs. Fairfax hesitated, then smiled thinly. He certainly has your eyes, Colonel, she said. And his mother's beauty, the danger past. For now, but as the music swelled and laughter returned, I saw another face across the room, Thomas Hartwell, a man whose plantation bordered ours, whose pride had survived the war, though his sons had not. He was watching me, not with curiosity but calculation. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. That night, as we rode home, I told William what I saw in his eyes. He knows something, I whispered. Or he will soon. William's jaw tightened. Then we'll be careful. We've hidden this long, but I knew the truth. Secrets are like babies. Sooner or later, they must be born. Virginia, 1867. One whisper becomes a weapon. One secret begins to bleed. If every glance could ruin you, could you still smile through it? The morning he came, the world was too quiet. Even the birds had gone still, as if they knew judgment was on its way. From the nursery window, I saw him, Thomas Hartwell, riding up the long road, flanked by two men on horseback. His posture straight as a fence post, his expression carved from stone. William called for me from below. Celestine, his voice echoed up the stairs, careful, strained. Mr. Hartwell has come to call. I looked at my reflection, silk dress, calm face, trembling hands. Then I looked at James playing on the floor with his wooden horse. I kissed his forehead, whispered, "Stay quiet for Mama," and went downstairs. Hartwell stood in our parlor like a man surveying stolen land. He removed his hat slowly. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, his bow stiff with mockery. "You've kept yourself well." "Mr. Hartwell," I replied, keeping my tone polite. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" He smiled without warmth. "Oh, not pleasure. Business, perhaps. Or truth, depending on how you see it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, yellowed, brittle. "Found this while sorting the Morrison estate records. Seems one of his bills of sale survived the fire." He unfolded it carefully, the crackle of old paper cutting through the silence. "One female slave named Celeste, age 14, sold to Colonel William Ashford of Henrico County, 1857. Description matches you perfectly, my dear, even down to the small scar on the left shoulder." My breath caught. My hand moved too fast into the place he'd named. Hartwell's smile widened like a blade. "There it is. Proof enough." William stepped forward, his voice hard. "How dare you bring this filth into my home?" "Oh, William," Hartwell chuckled. "You've always been a poor liar. I'm not here for theatrics. I'm here for justice." He turned to me again. "You played your part well, Celeste. But the masquerade's over. You'll confess what you are, or I'll deliver this paper to every paper and courthouse in Virginia." My knees weakened, but I stood straight. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted," he said simply. "Order. You and your child have no place in it. Give up the plantation. Surrender your false claim and leave quietly. Or I'll make sure every neighbor from Richmond to Savannah knows what kind of blood runs through your house." William's voice cracked with fury. "You'll ruin us both." Hartwell's eyes glittered. "You ruined yourself the day you forgot your place. The room pulsed with silence. For a moment I thought William might strike him. Instead, he said, "Give us till morning." Hartwell tipped his hat, satisfied. Of course. I'm a patient man. When he left, the house felt smaller, darker. William sank into a chair, his face pale. "He knows," I whispered. "Yes," he said. "And soon everyone will." We sat together in silence, listening to the clock tick away our last hours of peace. Upstairs, James laughed softly in his room, the sound of innocence too pure for the world waiting below. That night, William held me and said, "We'll find a way." But I knew there was none left. A paper had found its way home, and paper in Virginia could be deadlier than bullets. Virginia, 1867. One document, one scar, one secret no longer safe. If someone held your past like a weapon, would you beg, run, or fight? By sunrise, the world outside had turned to ash-gray mist. I had packed a small bag, some coins, a dress, and a tiny daguerreotype of James. William sat in the chair across from me, his face hollow. "We can run," he said again, his voice breaking. "With what money?" I asked softly. "With what name?" The sound of hooves silenced us both. Through the window, I saw them. Hartwell leading a group of men up the drive, their coats black, their faces hungry for scandal. The sheriff was with them, and behind him 2 men from town who used to tip their hats to me. "Take James upstairs," I whispered. "He can't see this." William gathered our boy in his arms, and James reached for me, crying, "Mama!" I kissed his forehead, forcing a smile that felt like goodbye. "Be brave for me," I whispered. The men didn't bother knocking. Hartwell pushed open the parlor doors and smiled. "Mrs. Ashford, or should I say, Celeste?" His voice carried triumph like a judge reading a verdict. "Your lies end today." I stood tall. "Then let's end them properly." They wanted a confession. They wanted blood dressed as justice. So I gave them one, yes, I said. I was born a slave. I came from Morrison's farm. I deceived Colonel Ashford. Gasps echoed through the room. William took a step forward, but I raised my hand to stop him. I lied about who I was. I took advantage of his kindness, of his grief. The ceremony we had, it meant nothing. He believed I was free. It wasn't the truth. But it was the only story that could save them. The sheriff's brow furrowed. "And the child?" I took a breath. "The child is his, born of his cousin, the real Celestine Ashford, who died of fever in New Orleans. I only claimed him to make my lie more believable. A lie within a lie. A mother's protection woven through deceit. I could feel William's heart breaking beside me. Hartwell smiled, satisfied. "You see, gentlemen? The order of things restored." He looked at me then, his gaze like cold steel. "And you'll sign that confession." "I will," I said. "If you swear you'll leave my son unharmed." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "The boy's innocent. He stays." I signed my name, Celeste, alias Celestine Ashford. Each stroke of the pen slicing through my life. By evening, I was led away in irons. The house I'd once ruled faded behind me, its windows glowing gold in the dying light. Through one of them, I saw a small silhouette pressed to the glass. James watching his mother vanish down the road. I didn't cry. Tears would have been mercy, and mercy was no longer mine. William called after me, his voice breaking through the wind. "I'll save you, Celeste. I'll find a way." I turned once. "You already did," I whispered. "You gave him a name. Virginia, 1867. One lie saves a child. One truth dies with a mother. If saving your child meant damning your own name forever, would you do it?" Prison smelled of rust, sweat, and forgotten prayers. The walls were damp. The light barely reached the floor. I had been there 2 months when I stopped counting the days. Freedom had always been a dream measured by distance. Now it was measured by breath. I was no longer Madame Ashford or Celestine, just Celeste, prisoner number 419. The guards called me woman, never by name. Names were for people who mattered. I spent my hours writing invisible letters on the wall, words I'd never send. To William, to James, to the unborn child I could feel stirring beneath my ribs. Yes, another child. God had placed life inside me again, even as the state prepared to take mine. The warden came once a week, his voice flat. "They'll hang you after the birth." "It's the law, the law." That word again, sharp as a whip, cold as iron. In January, the pains began. A prison doctor, a midwife with tired eyes. No comfort, no prayers. Only me, the sound of chains clinking and the faint cries of a newborn breaking through the stone. A girl, tiny, perfect, fierce, her skin pale enough to pass, her eyes gray like morning fog. I named her Hope. I held her for 3 days. I whispered every dream I'd never live long enough to see. I want you to walk free, I told her. To be loved without permission. To speak without fear. When they came to take her away, I didn't fight. William had arranged for her adoption by a family in Boston. Kind people, he said, who owed him favors. She would never know her mother's face, but she would know freedom. That was enough. After she was gone, the silence was almost merciful. I spent my last nights writing on scraps of paper they would never let me send. To William I wrote, protect James. Tell him nothing until he's strong enough to bear it. To my children I wrote, the world tried to own your mother. It never could. The day of the execution came cold and bright. The preacher asked if I had final words. Yes, I said. Tell my children their mother was not a slave when she died. She was free. They led me to the courtyard. The rope waited. I looked at the rising sun. Soft gold spilling over the prison walls. I thought of James's laugh. Of Hope's small hand around my finger. And then for the first time in years, I felt peace. The drop came swift. The silence after, even swifter. But somewhere beyond the gallows, I swear the wind carried a whisper. A mother's promise that love outlives chains. Richmond, Virginia, 1868. One rope, one name, 2 children who would carry her story without knowing it. If your death could buy your children's freedom, would you take the bargain? They buried me in an unmarked grave outside the prison yard. No stone, no name. Just a patch of earth too stubborn to forget. Ashford Manor lived on for a few more years, though its heart had been cut out. William never remarried. He kept my wedding ring locked in a wooden box, beside a small lock of hair, and 2 faded letters the guards had returned unopened. He raised James as his heir, never speaking my name again, not even when the boy asked who his mother was. James William Ashford grew into the kind of man his father once hoped to be. Steady, educated, hungry for justice he couldn't explain. He went north, studied law, and by 1875 he stood in the Massachusetts Senate as its first man of African blood, though he never knew it. Reporters called him a symbol of progress. He just called himself a son of Virginia. Hundreds of miles away, Hope grew up under another name, Eleanor Peyton, the daughter of a Boston merchant and his wife. She became a teacher, then a suffragette. She fought for women's voices, for children without names, for the right to choose who they could love. No one ever knew that the fire in her heart came from a woman who had once burned her own past to save her. In 1895, fate brought them within a whisper of truth. James gave a speech in Boston. Hope sat in the crowd, unaware that the man whose words made her weep shared her blood. When he passed through the audience, their eyes met. Something flickered, not memory but recognition of spirit. A heartbeat later, they turned away, strangers again. Years rolled on. The plantation crumbled. The great house fell into ruin. Vines swallowing the white columns. Rain washing away the names carved into the stone. Locals said a woman in white sometimes walked the grounds at dawn, pale, barefoot, carrying a single rose. They called her the ghost of Ashford Manor. They said she wept for something she could not bury, and waited for someone who never came. Time did what time always does. It silenced the truth. Until 2003. During renovations of the old Richmond courthouse, workers found a hidden compartment behind a wall. Inside, a box sealed with wax dated 1868. Inside the box, my letters to William, my confession written in my own hand, and a folded scrap of cloth still stained with the ashes of the swamp wedding's torchlight. The historian said it changed everything. That the story of the slave who became a plantation mistress was no myth, but a love story buried alive by law. They displayed my letters in glass, beside a note that read, "She died a slave on paper, but free in her choice." When the press asked what the story meant, one scholar said, "It means even lies told for love can change the world more than truths told in fear." And maybe that's true, because I am still here. In the faces of every child who dares to rise above the name they were given. In every woman who refuses to be owned by her past. In every whisper that says love, even forbidden, can be holy. They called me Celeste. They called me Celestine. But history finally calls me free. Virginia, 2003. One box, one ghost, one story the world tried to erase. If you believe stories like Celeste's should never fade again, subscribe, share, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Do you think history remembers love? Or only those who try to hide it?